welcome to the sit-down interview workshop, guys. Happy to have you all here. We're back with our virtual workshops after our brief hiatus. Happy to have you. So yeah, so today what I'm going to be talking about is not just kind of the more soft skill part of being a good interviewer. So that means, like, you know, being able to engage with your subject, with your audience, with your with whoever your guest is, but also kind of more on the technical side, because I've found the more prepared I am on the technical end of things, that frees up my brain so that I can actually focus on being a good interviewer, being a good conversationalist, really, at the end of the day. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing, is kind of getting rid of all of the barriers, because there is a lot going on when you're trying to put a show together or set up an interview. And so, yeah, just making sure that you're able to kind of get things squared away on that end, so then you'll be able to do your job like you want. All right, yeah, so yeah, with that, let's go ahead and kind of get cracking here. We can check out our first slide. So first things first, what makes a good interview? I guess that's a good question to start with. And I think number one for me, and for anybody, I'm sure, is making sure that whoever you're talking to, they are comfortable and they are interested. Somebody who is comfortable and interested is going to be a good interview. And also, I think a really big thing where I talk about this kind of having to do with ethics in kind of documentary work or journalism or interviewing, is not necessarily having an agenda. So by that I mean, you're not going in with your mind already made up about the person you're talking to, because that doesn't really benefit anybody at the end of the day. That kind of just leaves both of you with kind of a subpar interview. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. And then, of course, active listening. Yeah, this is something that I think is probably the hardest thing about being an interviewer, is because it's hard to kind of keep that conversation train going while also, you know, keeping things on track, while also still being able to, you know, sound like you're having a real conversation. You know, somebody gives you an interesting answer, you gotta be able to react to it, not just go from, okay, well, there's question 3, and now I'm gonna go to question 4. So yeah, being able to be an active listener, being able to, you know, come up with a follow-up question on the spot, you know, that is an art. It's an art that I myself have not really quite mastered, but something that's always good to work towards. And then finally, you know, keeping the edit in mind while you're filming. So that means both, like, give yourself time and space, because you know that you're going to be doing some post work on this interview. So don't feel like everything has to be good and perfect in one go. Also keeping the edit in mind for the sake of your interviewees, so then they can feel comfortable and they don't feel like they have to get it right from the get. So yeah, those are just a couple of the top level stuff that's really good to think about when you are kind of preparing yourself for that interview. So yeah, from there, let's go ahead and get cracking with kind of pre-production end of things, what you want to get squared away before you even start doing your show. So first thing, number one, always, always, always research your subject. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter if they're a very well-known person or not well-known at all. You want to have some sort of level of background on them to, one, be able to have something to talk about, and two, to kind of maybe, you know, maybe then you'll kind of figure out, oh, maybe this is a sore subject. Maybe I should be careful when I talk about this subject. It seems like it's sensitive. Or maybe I shouldn't touch it at all. Or, oh, wow, there's something I never knew about this person, and why hasn't it been explored yet? So, and that's super important for when you're interviewing somebody who's a public figure. You know, go back and look at other interviews. What have they talked about already? You know, and can you tread new ground? You know, you don't want to just give them the same interview that they've already done 30 times, because one, why would anybody watch it? And then two, your interviewee is just going to be bored. You know, they're like, oh, okay, cool, another one of these. Let me just get my same boilerplate answers that I always throw out, and, you know, let me wait the 20 minutes till this is over. So, so yeah, those are kind of the two big things. And on that front, when it comes to doing research, I have 2 video clips I want to show you guys. One is somebody who does a lot of research. One is somebody who does not. The first one will be Larry King, who recently passed away. Larry King notoriously did not prep for interviews. He would not want to know more than their name and what they did. His reasoning was that it kind of, you know, allowed for an interesting conversation, in that, like, well, if he already knows everything about them, then what are they going to talk about? You know, he won't have any questions, which is an interesting idea, you know, but it does have its setbacks. So let's go ahead and look at one of those setbacks right now.
Said how long?
9 years, 180 episodes.
You gave it up, right?
I did, sir.
They didn't cancel you. You canceled them.
You're not aware of this?
No, I'm asking you.
You think I got canceled? Are you under the impression that I got canceled?
Have I hurt you, Jerry?
I thought that was pretty well documented.
Is this
still CNN?
Don't most shows go down a little?
Most people do also. But, yeah, no, I went off the air. I was the #1 show on television, Larry. Do you know who I am?
Jewish guy, Brooklyn.
Yes.
Okay.
75 million viewers last episode.
Boy, you don't take it so bad.
Well, that's the big difference between being canceled and being #1.
Okay, I'm sorry. We'll be right back.
Jeez.
B-movie opens. B-movie opens.
Can we get a resume in here for me?
B-movie opens tomorrow.
Hey,
we'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, that was awkward. It was funny, it was awkward. I couldn't tell if it was good or bad. I mean, Jerry wasn't necessarily all that kind about it anyway, but yeah, you could see how, like, not preparing at all is not necessarily the best course of action either. The next clip I want to show you is somebody who is notoriously over-prepared for their interviews, to the point where it can come off as almost off-putting. This is a guy who goes by the name of Nardwuar. He is a Canadian journalist, and he interviews a lot of, actually a lot of hip-hop artists. A lot of musicians in general, but a lot of hip-hop artists. And so I have just a brief clip. What he likes to do is he kind of likes to bring up really old facts about them, also reciting like really old lyrics that they wrote. And so this is just an example of that. This is an interview with the late Juice WRLD, talking about one of his old raps. So yeah, we can watch that next.
People say I'm crazy, but my bar's going insane. Quote, on the radio, spitting radio.
Rhymes, waves.
Waves!
Yeah.
The illest hour radio show.
What the fuck?
WH?
Bro, you talk about my high school.
WHFH. Jalen, the illest.
What the fuck? What the fuck? How? Nardwuar, how? How do you...
You are Juice WRLD. We have to know. But what can you say? Homewood Flossmoor had a radio show? You had some bars on the radio, spitting radio.
Those were old quotes. I was a freshman in high school. How does he know? I don't remember that shit. What the hell? Bro, so like, okay, my school has a radio show, and when I first decided to like become a rapper, I was on there, and I would like freestyle. And those were like old quotes. How do you know this, bro? What the
Right. Yeah, there's also a lot of cursing in those interviews too, because a lot of people end up being very surprised. But you see, I mean, the benefit of that is that like it's a question that guy didn't expect, and we learned something about that rapper that we probably wouldn't have learned because that guy asked a really weird question. So yeah, so just kind of two ends of the spectrum. You know, I mean, I think there's positives and negatives to both. There's plenty of interviews where you see Nardwuar, people cut the interview off early because they're just like, who the hell is this guy? He's creeping me out. But yeah, so I just want to show you kind of like two ends of the spectrum. I mean, I think there is some benefits to kind of going in, you know, ready to kind of learn new things, because that's how you're going to stay engaged. That's how you're going to ask better follow-up questions. But you also, you know, obviously don't want to embarrass yourself or your guest. All right, yeah, so can we see what the next slide is, please? All right, so yeah, when we're talking about pre-production, just like anything else when you're going out in the field, keeping the location in mind, you know, making sure you have a good idea of what the light, sound, space, and background situation is going to be. Also, kind of the other layer that I'm going to add to this is when you're picking a location, pick one that like makes sense for your subject. So that means, you know, maybe it has some relation to what they're going to be talking about, or it's a place that's, you know, comfortable for them. So if you're interviewing somebody who maybe, again, is not a public figure, not very well known, doesn't do a lot of TV, you know, interview type things, then you want to make them as comfortable as possible. So you don't want to make them kind of like travel into a new, strange place they've never been, surrounded with new strange lights they've never seen, surrounded by a bunch of new strange people they've never met before. So kind of like the least you can make that person jump to be able to talk to you, then that's just going to benefit you in the long term. So so that's what, in my own experience, that's kind of what I would try to do, is I would always try to pick a place, ideally their home, or someplace that I know that they'll be comfortable with, making sure that they are clear on when and where to be, and also clear on, what the time requirement is. You really should be telling them, like, hey, this might be like a 3-hour thing, or, oh, this is just going to be a 30-minute thing. And then try your best to stick to that. And also, if you're going to be doing one of those long haul interviews, which I've certainly done before, taking time for breaks, that's pretty important. And then the last thing I want to say is, when it comes to crew size, especially when you're dealing with somebody who is not a public figure, not used to doing TV interviews, you definitely want to spend time or making sure that you're not bringing like everybody and your cousin to come sit in on this interview. The smaller your crew, the more comfortable the person's going to be. So that's kind of the stuff we want to talk about as far as pre-production goes. Oh, ethics. Okay, yeah. So this is something that could easily be 3 workshops. Is a really, really, really heady subject. But there's something that, another thing that you really need to keep in mind when you are interviewing somebody is that you are the person in power here. You are creating an inherently unbalanced power dynamic because you're the one asking the questions. You're the one bringing in the cameras. You're the one who's going to be editing it, putting it together. Whoever you're interviewing is relinquishing quite a bit of control, and you got to keep in mind what that means. So that means you got to consider things like context, safety, transparency, consent, and justice. So a lot of these things kind of feed into each other, but I'll kind of cover it more broadly. Specifically with something with justice, that really means, again, if you're interviewing somebody who, maybe is not going to be doing a lot of interviews, or you're doing some sort of like issue, social justice, or personal type story, this is likely, the one time this person has to maybe be on camera and say their piece. And you want to make sure that they leave the interview feeling like they were able to say what they wanted and you were able to get what you wanted. You should never kind of go into the interview thinking that you need to get this out of this person. You should really be going in like, how can I have a good conversation? And if you have a good conversation, then that's going to mean that the person you're talking to is going to feel seen and feel heard. There's also, as far as like doing things like pre-interviews, I don't really suggest doing like a straight up full on pre-interview, because if you give them all the questions, then they're going to come in with their canned answers. But you should let them know the nature of the questions you're going to ask. What kind of subjects are you planning on hitting? So then that's going to allow you to be more transparent, again, making your subject more comfortable, again, making them feel like they have agency over kind of what's going on, and they're not just like at your whim or at your mercy. Again, ethics when it comes to both journalism and documentary, very, very long subject matter. I would encourage you to do some research on that front. Okay, yeah, so here we're going to talk about format. So by format, I mean there's more than one way to skin this cat. So there's multiple different ways we could be talking to your subject, and that changes the way you're going to film it. So how you choose to talk to the person, how you choose to shoot and film it, that's going to affect what kind of questions you ask. So yeah, let's dig in a little bit about that. So that's where I have my little friends here. So yeah, I think, when you're going out into the world and you're doing field stuff, chances are that field thing is probably something where you as the interviewee, as the producer, are probably not planning to be on camera, but your guest is. So then, and also probably more than likely, if you're renting equipment for TV, you only got the one camera. So you kind of got to make do with what you got. And so like here, I just want to kind of show you like when you are doing an off-camera interview, make sure when you're asking those questions, keep an idea of like where you want the person talking to you, not the camera. So you got to make sure that you are either, pretty very, very close to the camera. So that means they're meeting your eye line, and that eye line is close to the camera itself. You don't want them looking straight at the camera. That's off-putting. I mean, I'm doing it right now, but I'm like directing myself towards you, so that kind of makes sense. But when you're kind of doing more of a documentary style sit-down interview, you probably don't want them looking straight at the camera. But people do that. It's just that's a very serious aesthetic choice to make, so I encourage you to be careful with it. You know, and also some people kind of like to maybe not do things as direct. You know, maybe your guest is actually looking at you, but your camera's at more of an angle, you know. And then this looks more like those like MTV like punked videos, you know, when you see what was that, Ashton Kutcher or whatever, and like the camera would be like all the way down here, and he'd be like talking up over in this direction. Again, aesthetic choice, strong one, but I'm not gonna, you know, yuck your yum. So, but just again, be cognizant when you're making those choices. Oh, I hear we have a question. So yeah, go ahead.
If you have an introduction or questions prepared but not memorized,
what
suggestions do you have so it doesn't look like the interviewer isn't reading info or prompts?
Okay, got it. Well, I mean, it's probably better that it's not memorized, because if it is memorized, then you're just going to be, you know, vomiting it up verbatim, and then that's not going to sound very natural. So, I mean, I think it is really important to just have the top level ideas of what you want to say. And then, you know, in the moment, if you just kind of let yourself treat it like a real conversation, then it is going to work out for your benefit. Then, yeah. So I would say on that front, for your own self, preparing your interview questions. Yeah, you should, you know, be able to, you know, come prepared, but also be able to kind of throw some of that stuff out the window. Yeah, I think it's, and you know, you may end up forgetting questions because you get lost in the moment, but that's good. It's probably better if you get lost in the moment than if you're just running through the list. So yeah, I would say don't worry too much about like, oh, okay, I got to phrase the question exactly like this in order to get the answer, you know, properly. I don't think that's necessarily true. And then also, you know, when you are framing questions and getting answers, especially if you are doing the off-camera interview, so that means in the edit, you are not going to be in the finished piece. All right, the edit is just going to be your guest talking. So that means you got to change the way that you phrase your questions. If it's just the guest talking and you're not in it, then the guest needs to talk in complete sentences. You know, you can't ask yes/no questions or give yes/no answers. So you got to kind of think about the way you frame your questions, and I think we talk about that in a minute. Yes. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question to some degree. So yeah, I think it's very important to be prepared, but also don't chain yourself to that list of questions you made by any means. If you really prepare, if you really get into your head and you throw those questions out the window, you'd be surprised how much things kind of come naturally. Yeah, and you can also, you know, if you're interviewing with somebody else, if somebody else is going to be there, they can have the questions. They can be like, hey, this is a big one you forgot. Maybe we should get that real quick. You know, you can do that too. So that way you're able to stay engaged with the person, and you got somebody else kind of in the background making sure that you kind of dot your I's and cross your T's. So yeah, hopefully that answers that one. Okay, so yeah, these are just kind of the different formats. You know, we've got their single camera, 2 camera. Again, you know, at KTV, when you take out a field camera, you only get 1. But you know, your cell phone is a solid B cam. Don't knock it. You know, obviously don't use it for audio, but your B cam can most certainly be a cell phone video. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So yeah, definitely give that a shot. Using something else as a B cam is a good alternative. And then that just gives you something to cut with. It makes it easier for you in the edit, in the long one, if you have more than one thing to cut to during an interview. So yeah, so that's kind of 2 cam stuff. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and jump ahead.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yes, so I've done TED Talks. I've interviewed people who are top authors and for business up on the North Shore. Anyway, my question is this. So how do I make it so it doesn't seem, my question was regarding actually Zoom, because I worked camera behind the scenes, and now I'm in front of the camera, and I've done other things in front of the camera, but now I'm finding myself when I'm doing an introduction, kind of looking sideways to read a prompt because I'm not in an area where someone can hold a cue card up or prompt me. And I find that having a smaller screen that I'm working off of my computer, which is a newer computer, I'm looking like planting. I've had cue cards around me so I can just glance real quickly and remember it.
Right.
And so, so sorry, my other question might have been a little vague or a little misleading, so I apologize. But yeah, so I'm looking for a way so it doesn't look like, because it might be a big introduction on what they, I might have maybe a data prep for this, and I'll be looking sideways trying to read it. And when I see the edits, I'm still in it, I also go, so the camera will shoot back on me. So it's not strictly on a subject for 45 minutes because they want to break up the camera angles. So you kind of chime in a little bit, but I find myself, I'll look kind of sideways trying to read a card or read a prompt that I have. And it looks just, I wish I had like a prompt in front of me or something where I could read a teleprompter and have that going. But I looked into that as well, and it's just going to be really hard to set that up. So what do you recommend so I'm not looking sideways trying to read my, an introduction? And usually I memorize them, and the closing of the interview is easy to remember. But sometimes remembering all the things and what books they wrote, especially when you have one day to prep, is hard.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess, thank you for your question. So off the top of my head, my thought would be, is there a way that you can pre-record that intro part? Does your interviewer really need to be there for that part of it? Could that be something that's done later, after, separately? But yeah, that is tricky. If you're doing like Zoom interview, I'm assuming you mean like you got your laptop camera and then you don't want to look like you're like reading the screen right below it, or reading off to the side. So yeah, it sounds like that's a yes for you. So okay, cool. So yeah, when you're trying to like mimic a teleprompter, that's tricky with your home laptop. So yeah, I would say if you can pre-record it, that'd be best. If you got some like B-roll stuff, some like supplementary materials to show while you're doing that intro part, you edit that on top of it. That's a really great lead-in. You don't necessarily have to be looking at you for the whole time. That's kind of another way to go about it. When you are getting the questions, now these ones are geared more towards when you as the person talking, or as the interviewer, are not going to be in the finished piece. All right. So that, again, that's really going to change the way that you frame your questions and really going to change the way that your guest should give answers. So, so if you're asking yes/no questions like, "Oh, was it cool that you went to the moon?" And then they'll be like, "Yeah, it was cool." Once you cut out your question, all you're going to get is, "Yeah, it was cool," and people aren't going to know what the heck you're talking about. So if you could really frame it more in a different way where you're like, tell me about your recent space travels, then they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I recently went to the moon. It was really cool. I picked up some moon rocks. I met an alien." So that's kind of, if you're giving it a much more open-ended question, then you're going to get a much more broad answer. And then that's where you can come with the follow-up. All right. So when you get a broad answer like that, because you have such a broad question, then you're able to be more pointed with your follow-up questions. So yeah, so that's kind of one of the things on there is if you give yes/no questions, you're going to get yes/no answers. And that's, I mean, even if you are going to be on camera, just getting a yes/no answer is not very exciting. So make sure that you're thinking about, you're kind of giving prompts, not so much, I mean, you are asking questions, but think of it more of like giving somebody like a writing prompt almost, when you're kind of coming up with these questions for your bit. I think a couple other things, make sure that, especially if you're planning on editing, if you're planning on doing posts for this thing, especially if you're cutting out your questions, make sure you give yourself a decent pause between when that person stops talking and you start talking next. Because that's going to, just like give yourself a break here. You don't need to rush through it. You don't need to make the person feel like they're being rushed. But also for editing purposes, if you are butting up against the end of their answer with your next question, then it's going to be really tricky for you to edit that in a way that's going to come off naturally. Also, another thing to keep in mind is don't be afraid to ask it again. If you give the person, ample warning, like, oh, hey, I think, maybe you think the person needs the shot either because they kind of stumbled over their words quite a bit, or maybe a plane went by or something like that. Don't be afraid to ask them to kind of give the answer again. Because you don't want to leave and get into your edit and realize, oh, okay, I don't have a good version of this really important answer. So don't be afraid to kind of ask it again, because you'll be able to edit. I'm sure they would like the opportunity to do it again. And also, finally, real quick, I want to talk about opening with the easy ones. So I think this is a really crucial thing to do, because opening with the easy ones, especially for somebody who is not a public figure, giving them time to get comfortable with the really weird scenario that you just created in possibly their home. And also, so you can work out any technical difficulties. So then once you start recording, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, looks like the battery mic's died, so I'm going to have to change the mic battery real quick. And that's okay, because all you asked them was like, where are they from? So it's not a huge deal. So yeah, so starting with the easy ones kind of helps you out in more ways than one. Because you are going out in the field, and because this interview is probably, something that's going to be the main piece, the main part of whatever your end product is, spend time on making sure that the composition looks good. So, you want to be cognizant of like what the setting is, what the backdrop is. Make sure you don't have, some mic cable in the shot. Really spend the time really scrutinizing your image to make sure that there's nothing back there that you don't want. Also making sure that it's a relevant image, more or less. If it's going to be in focus, you want to make sure it makes sense. Camera angle, camera height, just kind of basic things there. Usually you want to keep it at eye level, but again, plenty of people have gotten very creative with the way that they choose to frame up their interviews. Just making sure that, when you make that choice, you make it consciously, and that you're not kind of shoving yourself into a really weird box that you won't be able to get out of. I think I have a couple real quick examples that I wanted to show of some composition looks from different documentaries, different interviews. So this one has a wide shot and a medium close-up. This is from the documentary The Imposter. It's pretty good. I want to show this one because the lighting I find to be really interesting. I think it's it almost seems like a mix between high key and low key, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I like it because the setting is obviously their home, and you kind of get an idea of who this person is just by the space. You get a lot of context clues just based on what's going on in the image. You can tell that they're probably like more of middle-class people. You can tell that, they obviously maybe live in a more rural area because of the way that they choose to decorate. So that's kind of why I wanted to show that one. It gives you context of who this person is. And you can tell that also it's a 2-camera interview they were doing. Okay, we can move on to the next one. So this one, this is like one of the like most like mind-blowing framings that I don't understand. Like, this is a really good documentary called Lo and Behold. It's Werner Herzog. He usually knows what he's doing. But this thing is not about muffins, but that is all that I'm seeing in this framing, is that it seems like it's gonna be a movie about muffins. It's not, but it sure does look like it. So this is just like an example of like, what you put in the frame is going to affect the way that people are going to intake the image. Also, really don't love seeing that bright window right behind that subject's body, because it's so blown out. That's the first thing, after the muffins, the next thing you go to with your eye is that window. So yeah, don't really understand what happened here, but I figured it'd be a good example of like, maybe a don't. All right. And then this is a interesting framing for multiple people if you're interviewing more than one person. So yeah, we got a OTS of BTS, the K-pop band. So OTS means over-the-shoulder shot. It's a really interesting way. I don't know if I love it, but it was interesting doing an over-the-shoulder shot from the journalist to this group of 7 people. That's pretty tricky. So I thought that was really interesting. This lighting is a lot more kind of your television lighting. It's high-key lighting. That means that the background is very well lit, the subjects are very well lit, everything is pretty well lit. The difference between your highs and lows aren't that great. So let's kind of talk about lighting. So what I was talking about was high key lighting and low key lighting. So this is has a huge effect on the mood and tone of your piece. So I have an example of a high key lighting frame and then a low key lighting frame. So the one on the left, you can see obviously high key lighting. The subject is very well lit, the background is very bright. All around, looks like a happy thing going on there. I would love to watch more of that. And then on the other side, you got Wild Wild Country. This one is low-key lighting. You can tell it seems pretty serious what this woman's talking about. Yes, her face, her key light is, pretty well lit, but her fill light on the other end, very dark, and the background is also very dark as well. So, yeah, now we're going to demo an example of kind of how to switch two different ways to do it: high key lighting, low key lighting. I'm gonna go over here. We got Lewis, kind enough to let me kind of have him sit in and be my guest for the afternoon. So, yeah, what we have going on here, this is more of a high key lighting scenario. So that means I have a light background set up with those screens, and also I got the key and the fill are pretty bright. So yeah, here's our camera set up. This is our field camera got set up. And then go ahead, kind of zoom in on my framing here just a bit and adjust. All right. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. So this is more of like a medium close-up. All right, so again, you can see, I mean, this is looking maybe a little bit flat to me. I might end up maybe moving this fill light back a bit. But again, high key lighting. All right, probably a slightly more positive, upbeat thing that that Lewis is probably going to be talking about, if I were to venture a guess. The other thing that I really want to talk to you guys about is don't feel tied to the 3-point lighting spectrum, especially if you're out in the field. There's a pretty good benefit to instead just kind of use the space around you, especially if you're going to be someplace that has windows. You know, you can use those windows to your advantage. A window can work as a great key or fill light, and then you could supplement with your light kit. Of course, you know, when you're going to do that, if you're going to be mixing sunlight with field lights, you're going to put gels on. So you have to put like, you know, a light blue gel, so then it'll match the color of the sunlight, of daylight. So yeah, that's a great way to go about it. Keep in mind though, if it is a long-term interview, then that means you're going to have to keep in mind, you know, sunlight's going to change over time. So yeah, keep that in mind. Okay, so yeah, so this looks like not half bad. You know, I wanted to be able to show like a shallow depth of field here. Wasn't quite able to achieve it, but I think if I were to zoom into more of a close-up type situation, then you could see the background is kind of going out of focus a little bit. It's looking a little soft, which I like. And then as far as eye line goes, you know, I really want Lewis to be looking probably, again, so this is what it looks like if Lewis looks straight on to the camera. So if Lewis looks straight at the camera, then he's just directly looking at it. But if he were to look more at me instead, we can see what that looks like. You know, that looks a little bit more natural. I don't really feel like he's kind of like addressing me. It doesn't feel like he's doing some sort of like YouTube tutorial or something like that. So yeah, and then you know, you could go more extreme with it if Lewis were to look more at me if I move further away. You know, that is a one way to do it. You know, that's not a bad way to set things up. So I just don't want you to feel like you have to be right here. You know, it's an aesthetic choice you can make. But as long as you're being conscious of it when you're making that choice. When you are doing lighting on location, like I said, use natural light if possible. A thing that I really love to do, especially if you're in that unfortunate situation where you're in a room full of, you know, a bunch of white walls. Those white walls can be a great way to have a nice diffuse light. So if you were to, instead of aiming the light at your subject, actually aim it at the wall, and that white wall is going to bounce that light back onto your subject. It just diffuses the light nice and soft. That's a really interesting way to go about it. And again, you know, if it looks good, go with it. You know, don't feel like, oh, well, technically this light isn't at a 45-degree angle, and it's not actually, you know, far enough to the left, to the right. If it looks good, don't worry about it. There's plenty of times where happy accidents happen for me, and I just stick with it. Also keep in mind, especially if you're in a not controlled space, then you're definitely gonna not have as much control over light. And I think I have some examples. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, these are some different lighting setups from like CBS News, I think. You see, they're really close in there. And they also have very large, soft box lights. So yeah, it's set up a little bit differently. And then also, the thing that on the right, especially the woman in red, you see she's got like kind of, I think that's more her fill light, if I were to guess. The light that's kind of lower down. You know, it's not up above at a 45-degree angle pointing down. You know, it's from down coming up. So you have some wiggle room. Don't feel like you have to stick to, you know, that box of 45-degree angles and 3 lights. You have some different ways to go about it. So this one, kind of the same deal. You know, those lights are super high up and they're also very diffuse. So what's going on in that one light towards the upper in the center has what's called an egg crate on it. That's a kind of a different way to do diffusion. It cuts down on the light. It makes it more of like a softer look. And I think that's probably what's on both of their key lights. So yeah, Eric said that it also makes it more directional, which is true. So yeah, when you diffuse things, it diffuses it, and then also it kind of like narrows the angle at which it comes in. But in order for that to work, it has to be really close to the subject. So yeah, so that's just a fun new little light toy if you want to know about it. And then this one I really like for multiple reasons. One, I like it because it shows you how much jerry-rigging you can actually end up doing with your lighting. So I like it because, you see they just have like this net kind of thrown up against that window on one side. They have a bunch of flags, those like black sheets kind of covering some certain lights, blocking certain things. And also, yeah, they're in a really small space, but if you look at the final image, he's clearly not in the kitchen, but the final image would make you think that he is. And that's just kind of what depth of field can do for you. So that camera is probably pretty far away. He's clearly very far away from the background. And so that kind of creates a nice, soft-looking background effect. I mean, it's still doing that thing where that light is like right behind the person, but this doesn't bug me as much as it did in that image with the muffins. The other thing about this image that I really like is you can see that they are not using a wireless lav mic. They actually have a shotgun mic set up on a mic stand, aiming down at their subject very close. So then they don't have to worry about doing a wireless mic. And then you don't have to see the wireless mic. So I think it kind of, that's just a different choice that you can make. So just so you know that, you have different ways to go about it. Okay, I got a little sidetrack there, but we have our high key lighting, and then I'm going to real quick change into low key lighting. All right, so first things first, I'm going to take away this backdrop. All right, so if we give ourselves our darker backdrop, then our image will be darker. Also, light has a tendency to bounce off of things. So what's going to happen is, these screens were bouncing some light off, especially from the key and from the fill. These screens were bouncing some light off, and they were kind of creating maybe more ambient lighting all around, making the subject just seem a little brighter as a whole. So when we have a darker backdrop, that's less of a thing. All right, so already you can see like quite a bit of drama being added to this image. Yeah? And then the next thing I'm going to do, so you see what I'm doing with this fill light? I'm actually just pushing it up. All right? And I'm doing that, so now it's hitting the ceiling. And you see the kind of a pretty dramatic difference that made on the image. Now this is a very, whatever Lewis is talking about seems pretty serious. So yeah, that's kind of a real quick way to change the mood from something more upbeat to something far more serious, is by making sure your background is either lighter or darker, and also making that difference between your key and your fill all that more extreme. I think the one last thing I might do, just because that is such like a black void, I might pop on this backlight. Oh, thanks. So let's see what that does. All right, so yeah, that kind of adds a little bit of detail onto his shoulder. You see, kind of creates a little bit of a difference. I would say maybe if I could, I would bring it back more. Seems a little strong. All right. Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, Eric said not to catch the curtain on fire, and I think that's a really good tip. So yeah, because these lights are very hot. So yeah, I'll turn it off and on just so you get a look at it again. It kind of creates just a little bit more depth. It's very subtle, but there you go. I might even move my key light back. Let's see what this does. Now let's see what that image looks like. All right. Yeah, I could even throw some diffusion on this key light, and then this would be a pretty dramatic looking image. But okay, so yeah, there's just kind of a quick example of, how a little bit of changes can go a long way as far as, how you can change the mood and tone of your piece. But I do want to talk about it at very least, making sure that you know that like wireless lavs aren't the end all be all when it comes to doing an interview. There's a lot of pros and cons to doing a lavalier setup and a shotgun setup. So, and it all kind of depends on, well, how many crew people you have, what is your, capability and capacity that day. Also, what are you comfortable with? I personally prefer to do the shotgun method. So that means I've got a mic stand set up and I spend some time making sure that shotgun is pointed directly at the subject or where the subject's going to be. Then that subject will be able to just come in, sit down, and start talking. So that is something, again, I think is really great when your subject is somebody who is not a public figure, somebody who does not do a lot of interviews. If you're adding another layer of like, also we have to mic you up, and also you got to make sure that you're not going to be touching your chest or the hair's not going to get in the way, then all the more reason to do a shotgun mic. But that does create, a lot more work for you on the front end, making sure during the shoot that you are spending the time to make sure that, because shotguns are so directional, if you are not, really making sure you're aimed at perfectly, you also want to make sure your subject doesn't move around very much if the shotgun's going to be on a stand. So yeah, it really depends on the scenario. I would say if you're going to be maybe doing like a lot of interviews in a day, people are going to be coming through in the same space and you're doing like a lot of interviews at once, shotgun mic might be a really good option. And looks like we got another question. So yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Am I on?
You're
am
on.
I the one
hear
on
you.
mic? Yeah, somebody had written a question earlier. I'd like you to address it. The ethics, if there's any ethics in showing the subject your piece before you post it or publish it.
Oh.
Somebody had put up that question.
That's a great question. That is your call, because I think that is a really interesting point that has to do with the ethics of journalism and documentary. At the end of the day, they do agree to an interview. You should also make sure, that they're signing some sort of waiver. You can find boilerplate ones. I think we have a boilerplate one on our website. They're kind of all over the place, having them sign a waiver. That is up to you. You really are not technically required to do that for them, like give them final say. I would say, that's a nice thing to do for somebody who's, again, not a public figure. Maybe they're talking about a really sensitive subject and you want to give them the space to make sure that they feel okay with it. But yeah, you're really not obligated to. There's a really interesting, it's kind of, constantly in flux, the relationship between your interview and your interviewee. So yeah, that really does, I'll say from my own experience, only in very specific situations do I give somebody final cut over something or make sure that they're okay with something. I might be really specific, like, hey, how do you feel about this one part? And give them a yes or no. But usually I kind of go in saying like, hey, like this piece we're making, as long as you're clear from the get, what your intentions are, which you should be. You shouldn't be like kind of taking people for a ride. But as long as you're clear with your intentions from the get, then that person should feel comfortable accepting whatever the end piece is. So yeah, I mean, if you're creating a piece where you think that the person's going to be really unhappy with it, I mean, it depends on the person. Like if you're, I myself don't have very much experience with like, any sort of gotcha sort of journalism stuff. I think, when it comes to like really public figures or people who really need to be, not, I don't want to say taken to task, but like, show some sort of, accepting or acknowledgement of, maybe some harm that they did. You don't want to necessarily say like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. No, we'll cut out that whole bit about that horrible thing that you did. So I think it is very much a case-by-case basis. Again, I'll say from my own experience from things that I have done, I was dealing with some subjects that were, talking about very personal things. And I just made sure like from the get, like at any time during the interview, make sure that they're okay with what they're saying. So yeah, if they're okay during the interview, then chances are they'll probably be okay with the edit. Yeah, but that's a really good question. Thank you for that. Okay, yeah, a couple other things to talk about as far as audio goes. So when you are, out in the field, second to lighting, or sometimes more than lighting, audio can become like the hardest variable to work around. So by that I mean, there's a lot of things you got to keep in mind, things that might not work out so great because you're not in that controlled space. So doing things like, having a backup plan as far as like what you're recording on. Often, especially if I'm interviewing somebody who I don't have access to very often, I know this is like the one chance that I have, then I'm definitely going to be setting up a second audio recording device. So me personally, I have a Zoom recorder and I use that. I'll just kind of set that up. That's just like a little all-in-one recording device with a microphone attached to it. And I'll set that up somewhere close enough to the frame without being in the frame. That's one way to do it. We also have task cams here at Production Services. They're the same thing. You can take out a task cam and record onto that. That's an excellent backup option. Your cell phone, again, not a bad backup option as far as a backup audio source. Obviously not going to be great, but if things go super haywire and you don't realize you have no audio, at the very least you have, maybe that cell phone was like kind of maybe strategically placed behind like a mug or a plant or something in the frame, so that you at least have something instead of nothing. So always having some sort of backup plan when you're recording. Things like, HVAC sounds of like a heater or the air conditioning. I would say try your best to see if you can get those out of the picture entirely. If it's on constantly and not stopping, that's one thing. You can kind of deal with that in post a little bit. But if it's stopping and starting, that's a real issue. So you don't want to have, hear the sound of it just like, you're talking to the person and it's, nice dead room, and then all of a sudden it just goes as soon as the person, says something really like personal or affecting. Nothing worse than that. So I would say if you have the opportunity, make sure you can either turn off that HVAC system. I mean, this is definitely like a post-COVID suggestion. I definitely wouldn't do this now. But if you could get that thing turned off, that would be really beneficial to everybody involved. Obviously, things will get pretty toasty in there. So that's a balancing act. Things are going to get toasty, so people might get a little uncomfortable. Yeah, you got to kind of figure out your pros and cons on that one as far as HVAC sounds go. Doing a test recording. So always a good thing to do. Also, like I said earlier, asking the easy questions first, so then you got time to do your troubleshooting in the moment. That way you're not wasting people's time too much. Highly, highly suggest it. Really, really good idea. Making sure that, when you're in the field, like somebody should always be monitoring the actual recording of the audio. You don't want to just be like, oh, okay, sounds good. Yeah, well, let's roll with it. That's not going to work out well for you, especially if you're doing something like a wireless lav. Maybe you don't realize, just like this one here kind of has slowly shifted throughout the course of this workshop. Maybe my hair starts brushing against it. And if you're not monitoring the audio, or somebody's not monitoring the audio, you're not going to notice that, because that's only going to be on the mic. It's not going to be coming from the person talking. So always making sure that you're monitoring for those sounds. And then also, these microphones, depending on which kind of one you have, it might pick up something that you, with your naked ears, won't hear. Maybe a really distant airplane or something like that. So you want to make sure, again, somebody is really, really focusing on monitoring that audio. So they can be like, oh, hey, wait, let's hold on a second. Well, sounds like some feral cats are having a fight in the alley. We should probably take a break. I could probably do a whole other workshop on is getting good B-roll. Does not matter what you're doing, does not matter who you're talking to, does not matter if this thing is only going to be 30 seconds long. Why do I need B-roll? You should always get some sort of B-roll. One, because it makes the edit easier for you, giving yourself something to cut to when you're doing that edit. Really crucial. It also kind of, helps inform the story. This is not, it's show and tell. So you should be showing what the person is talking about, not just while they're talking. That kind of talking head style of filmmaking. So that means all it is just like, this person talks, and then this person talks, and then this other person talks, and then all the visual is just like different disembodied heads talking at the camera. You always want to have some sort of B-roll. So that B-roll could be things like, photos. It could be things like archival material. If the person's talking about how much they hate washing dishes, then maybe have them washing dishes. I don't know. Something like that. So yeah, you always want to have some sort of supplementary material. And you never have enough. I always wish I got more than I actually do end up getting. So yeah, definitely spend some time looking at finding some B-roll. Do that before and after your interview, you know. Yeah, so that you have a good idea. Other things, other sorts of B-roll, you know, it fell out of fashion and then it has kind of come back, but doing, you know, reenactments of some kind. Reenactments they were something that like in the beginning were very much a standard as far as documentary work. Then it kind of like fell out of fashion and was thought to be kind of cheesy. And then, what's the name of the documentary? I think it's called Thin Blue Line. Did some really artistic versions of reenactments, kind of brought it back again, then it fell back out of favor. Thank you. And then, yeah, and now it's kind of come back. So actually that documentary I talked about earlier, The Imposter, documentary that I would argue brought back the, or really started the crime, crime doc kind of wave that's happening right now. I would say not Making a Murderer, but actually The Imposter is probably the film that really started that trend again. But anyway, really good film, also a really great example of reenactments. But I hear we have a question. So yeah, question asker, I would love to hear your question.
Why do they call it B-roll?
Good question. So that has to do a little bit with my A cam and B cam deal. All right. So your A cam is getting the big important stuff. The big important stuff is usually gonna be the person talking. The B cam's kind of getting the extra stuff, the stuff that, you know, adds to the piece. So that makes it your B roll. So it's not your A roll, which is your interview. It's your B roll. It's your other stuff. It's your extra stuff. It's the goodies. So yeah. So that's kind of where that term came from for B roll. Do you have another question?
In the field work, you showed us in lighting about 2 or 3 different lights. How many lights are you allowed to take out?
Yeah, so here at Production Services, you have, our light kits give you 3 lights. Don't feel like you gotta use all of them, or you can. So you got a lot of wiggle room there. I would also say, because I think, you know, especially when we kind of teach lighting, and when you think about lighting, you think that like the key light is only doing key stuff. The fill light's only doing fill stuff, and that's not really true. You know, light moves, light kind of goes a little beyond just that narrow beam that you have. So you can use that to your advantage. Using things like a white piece of poster board does a lot. You know, you could bounce things off of maybe your key light, use that white poster board off frame as your backlight because it's bouncing off. So yeah, not just, you know, lighting isn't the only thing lights aren't the only thing that light your subject. That makes sense. Also feel free to like, you know, lighting options have gotten cheaper these days. Especially, you know, more on like the fluorescent side of things, fluorescent lighting. I know people kind of have their grudges against that, which are valid, but I think it's a really nice cost-effective option if you're planning on doing a lot of interviews long-term. You know, you can definitely build an okay, decent light kit for not a crazy amount of money if you want to. But again, yeah, we still got these workhorses. These will probably never die. Okay, we got another question? Okay, great.
The follow-up question is the clothing for the interviewer, the interviewee. Do you have to tell them what kind of clothing they should wear?
Okay, so yeah, as far as, right, that's a great point. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements that can go into that. So when it comes to going out in the field, you know, get them some idea. If you're going to be doing a wireless lav, definitely let them know, like, you know, no turtlenecks. You know, that's really important. So that's just another reason why I kind of tend to like doing shotgun, because it gives the wardrobe, you know, a little bit more room to do what it wants. Color, yeah. So I think as far as like, you know, what kind of clothing, that depends on your setting, you know. If you know that you're going to be in a purple room, then make sure they're not wearing purple also. You know, that's pretty important. But I don't know, you could even get really nitty gritty. You know, if you are maybe like trying to, I mean, this runs into some ethical things that I'm not so sure about. But if you wanted to kind of be like, oh, this person's supposed to be the bad guy, so they should wear red. And then this person's supposed to be the good guy, so they should wear blue. You know, if you wanted to like really manipulate your piece, you could. I don't love that idea, but I don't know. So I don't. Okay, we got another question. We got a few minutes left. I think we could probably take one or two more. Love to hear it.
What do you do when your guest is so loquacious and your guest's response goes beyond time limits and tolerance for detail?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I'll give that answer more again for the field end of things, because you do have the ability to edit. It is always awkward and hard to interrupt your guest. I would say try to, give them the leeway. If you do end up doing post on it, then, you can just cut it out. It's not a huge deal. But also, if you're like, oh, this person said they only have an hour to talk to me and it's taking them 20 minutes to answer this question, you can try your best to be kind of like, hey, really, really love what you're talking about here. I would love to, dig more into this, but we only have so much time with you. So, so if we could move on to these next questions, just so we can, be cognizant of your time. So, make it seem like you're kind of trying to be courteous towards them and less like, I don't want to hear about this. I don't care about this. I'm not going to put this in the piece. They don't need to know that. Again, like when I was working on past projects, past documentary that I finished, the hours of interview footage that I got from some people that I've followed for 5 years, it'd be like 10 hours worth of footage of just them talking. And they probably end up being like 20 minutes in the movie or not at all, unfortunately. That's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. So, going into it, they should know that you're going to be editing the piece. Let them know, hey, we're going to be editing this together, so don't worry about getting it perfect. Also, please don't mind if we kind of, shorten some of these answers for time. So hopefully that kind of gives you some outs there, so you can kind of juggle, making sure you're not making the person mad, but also making sure you're moving on when you need to. All right. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay. I'm ready for it.
I just wanted to say a little something about you glance at pre-interviews, and pre-interviews can be very, very helpful, particularly if you have a sense of the range of knowledge or the background of the person. So you had said, you don't want to give it away and get a canned answer. I would come back with, you can be a much more intelligent interviewer if you already have gleaned background on your subject, and you know that they're comfortable speaking about it. And on the other side of that, you might know they're not all that comfortable, but that's when you might really get to the truth, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's a really valid argument. I would agree with you on that. I would say that, when it comes to being able to tread new territory, then you kind of know where to tread if you kind of have some sort of framework. I guess I would say, yes, make sure you prep your subject in some form by talking them through what you're going to be talking about. But again, suggesting against giving them, here's question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But yeah, I think that's valid. I think you probably will find some new things if you do some sort of prepping, some sort of pre-interview on that side of things to kind of get a peek into something that maybe you didn't know you wanted to learn more about. So I would agree with you on that one. I think you're right. I think we just got a few more seconds. Maybe we have time for one more question if it's a quick one.
Big problem that we've had with people, celebrities telling big lies and stimulating violence and so on. And some people have been cut off lately from talking, but I'm just wondering if we have any ideas on that subject.
I think that's, when you start talking about more higher, bigger profile people, and there is still a balance you got to take between, taking somebody to task, challenging somebody for saying or doing something wrong, but also giving them the room to speak. And I think that is a very tricky territory because you also don't want to, giving somebody room to speak while also not condoning their actions. That is a whole other can of worms. So sorry, I'd love to get to it. Maybe another time. Okay, so thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you so much. Please send us an email. Please follow our YouTube channel. Let us know what you want us to talk about next. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you